conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And good Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend this past weekend. I know I did. I was able to spend some time processing some of the deer that I have harvested over the past week or so. With deer season coming in, I was able to also enjoy a Bardstown ghost walk. It was my mother's birthday here recently, and so to celebrate, we took her for an exciting night out on the town in Bardstown, Kentucky. If you have the chance, and if you're into those kinds of ghost walky stuff, learning about history, of course, of places in Kentucky like Bardstown, I do suggest you check that out. I had a good time. I can't guarantee you'll have a good time every time, but I know that I had a great time, and I learned quite a bit about Kentucky's history in Bardstown. I did not realize how old that town was, obviously, how long it had been around. They have a fantastic tavern there. I believe it's called Talbot's Tavern, that was originally constructed in 1775, or at least that building there, 1775. Fantastic thing. So, I suggest you check that out. But regardless, everybody, welcome to a great week here. Thanksgiving week on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We're going to be coming at you still Monday through Friday this week, despite the fact it's Thanksgiving. That doesn't mean necessarily the news stop, or you need to stop being informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky. Obviously, the Andrew Cooperrider Show is where you come to stay informed. There's a lot of places you could go to go learn about their national politics, which I know is sometimes more flashy or exciting, but nothing affects your life quite like what's going on right here in the state. As always, you can catch the Andrew Cooperrider Show Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. on WZXI. That's 1280 a.m. at 94.1 FM and 95.5 FM. You can also catch the Andrew Cooperrider Show at 1 o'clock everywhere else on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Twitter, and all other major podcasting platforms. And if you're catching this at the 1 p.m. time and you're like, you know what, I think Andrew's show needs to be on the radio in my area, well, just reach out to your local radio stations and tell them to check us out. We are more than able to go up on more stations outside of the central-ish Kentucky area that WZXI is. So feel free to reach out to them. As always, you can email the show at info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Send your stories, send your messages, send your comments. A few things I'll be covering today actually deals with things sent to me or emailed to me. So please make sure you email info@theandrewshow.com to, communicate. What do you want to see on the show? And last week I made it pretty clear that there are some situations where just because somebody is a Republican doesn't mean they're worth voting for. Not that you should vote for the Democrat, but in some situations, maybe leaving it blank may be a better choice because, well, frankly, maybe they're not much better than the liberal. They're a liberal themselves of just throwing an R next to their name, or them being elected actually hurts the conservative cause more than helps us. And I gave an example last week that deals with the state house, where Republicans have 80 out of 100 seats. And with such a huge majority, we need to be more concerned about getting strong conservatives in place and not just winning more seats if we want to get conservative things done in Kentucky at all. Now, many of you understand this. They understand this concept that how things operate, that, a Republican and a Republican majority is able to get more things done than a Democrat and Republican majority. And if those things that Republican wants to get done are liberal, are not conservative, go against our values, well, then they're hurting us. But some people don't understand this. Obviously, most of the people that would grasp their pearls or throw a fit about saying, look, there are some seats that's just not worth winning if we're going to win with that kind of person. A lot of these people tend to live in Lexington or Louisville. You see, their Republicans are in the minority, and the belief is very much so that anything we can do to grow the party, anything we can do to get more R's in seats, more R's in control, well, that's what we want to do, because simply they are in the minority. But I want to make clear that I don't want more R's in power. I don't want more Team Red Shirt in power. I want conservatives in power. I want people to join the Republican Party, but it's not because we became a Democrat light party. It's not because we threw up a giant, big old tent party accepting anyone with any kind of beliefs, as long as they're willing to put an R next to their name. The party then will stand for nothing. Being a conservative, being a Republican will then be meaningless. What I want to do is bring more people in by convincing them that the Republicans are right, that conservatism is an answer to your woes, not just bring people in while allowing them to keep the same beliefs. That's how we lose everything we stand for, everything that it means to be a Republican. We need to change minds, not just change party registrations. And in order to change these minds, I think Republicans certainly have to learn how to make an argument. We've seen this with abortion as far as it goes. It's a quote unquote losing topic, but that's because we're not making the right arguments. Because for so long, Republicans have been all logical in our arguments, and Democrats go after people emotionally. I think we've all heard the saying that when you're young and a child or a young adult, if you're not a liberal, if you're not a Democrat, you have no heart. And then as you grow older, if you do not become a Republican, then you have no brain. And I think that really boils down into how liberals create this emotional response that causes people to act in illogical ways. I mean, a great example of this will be dealing with vagrant and homeless and drug addict issues, because there are solutions to those problems, but they are not based on emotional solutions. They are hard things to do. They are quote unquote tough love. But the Democrat emotional response is to say they're victims of a system. They're victims of expensive housing or greedy corporations that don't want to pay enough for people to live. There's not enough jobs out there. We're not doing enough for them as a community, robbing people of the ability to have any kind of self-determination. They believe these people simply don't know any better, and well, therefore we have to treat them with kid gloves. And while this emotional response for Democrats may mean, hey, let's just give them more money or build a house for them, that is not the way conservatism seeks to deal with the issue, because conservatism seeks to deal with it on a logical standpoint. Conservatism says giving homeless people more money doesn't solve their problems, because they're most likely homeless or panhandling or vagrant because they're addicted to something. Obviously, there's mental health issues out there, but typically you don't see those people, the mental health issues people per se, panhandling. You'll see mainly the people panhandling, if they truly are homeless, are people who are addicted to some substance or another. And by giving them $1, well, you're just enabling them. In fact, that dollar you gave them might be the dollar they use to buy that poison that has destroyed their lives, and be that dollar that buys that poison that finally causes them to overdose and unfortunately die. See, the Republican way of dealing with this, or at least the logical way, would be to say, look, you're either going to get clean or get out of our communities, because we want contributing members of society here. And we do this through rigid enforcement of laws like not crossing into streets and those types of laws and ordinances that deal with panhandling at its core. But once again, well, that doesn't deal with the emotional response when it comes to this issue. And so as long as Democrats continue to win with emotional arguments, well, we can expect our cities to become an absolute wasteland. But it's time Republicans learn how to message their logical arguments with an emotional comment back. It's time we learn how to do that. And I've gone over several ways, but we'll go over a logical response to this problem after this short break. We're running up against the time clock. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. We'll be back here in just a few short minutes.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
Hey, y'all, welcome back to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. As always, if you want to reach out to the show, remember, you can email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Before the break, I was talking about the emotional response of liberals, how they win their arguments using the emotional. Republicans, well, we need to use our ability to win on logic, but also to create our own arguments that appeal to people emotionally. I was talking about the vagrancy, homeless issue, panhandling issue. That's not just bad in big cities like Lexington and Louisville, but all over. I've traveled the state. I've ran into panhandlers in some of the smallest communities in Kentucky. Surprised to see them. And, I came across Hopkinsville one time. I was down there, me and my wife. We were down there for my wife and I, we're down there for a political event, ran late. We ended up in a late night little diner they have there in Hopkinsville. And I heard a homeless person or a panhandler come in, throwing just an absolute fit because he was arrested by the Hopkinsville police. And he was arrested for breaking an ordinance they have saying you're not allowed to cross into the street. And he had crossed into the street to get $1 from a citizen. And the police officer saw that and arrested him. And he was thrown an absolute fit about it. But of course, that is the logical solution to the problem. You can either get fixed, be a contributing part of our community, and we'll give you the tools you need to do it. Remember, there's ample amounts of taxpayer-funded opportunities to treat addiction and things like that. There is not a shortage of that. Anybody who says, well, we just need more taxpayer funds to pay for more addiction treatments and those types of things is unaware of what the current situation is. There is plenty of that around. There is. Truthfully, there is. And so the emotional response is to let them continue to destroy their lives, serving nobody and destroying our communities because it seems like the nice thing to do. But the logical response is to say, get cleaner, get out. Sounds mean, sounds hard, but it's rather simple and easy. It just takes a little bit of gumption. But how do we sell that as an emotional response? Well, quite simply, we as Republicans have got to start showing the ramifications for these actions, showing that when liberals just give these panhandlers and addicts money, what they do with that money and how that leads to their demise. That is the proper way to make that argument. That's the proper way to fight back against the illogical and emotional arguments that the left so often make. Show the ramifications of allowing people to continue to live in squalor and then present your solutions. And speaking of illogical liberals, I was sent, I don't know if I was emailed or it was messaged to me on Facebook or what have you, but I was sent an article from Louisville Public Media on a company called AppHarvest. Now, longtime listeners of the show will know several months ago, I did a episode dedicated completely to the saga of AppHarvest. That's what the episode was called, Saga of AppHarvest. Now, Louisville Public Media states in the article that nobody's really ever fully told the full story of how AppHarvest came to be an absolute dismal failure. Well, that's false. I did it several months before final bankruptcy and firings were announced. I'd been following AppHarvest for some time out of interest to see if they would succeed or not, guessing they wouldn't. Now, for those of you who don't know, AppHarvest was an indoor, it's called a CEA, a controlled environment agricultural business. So basically giant greenhouses to grow the types of produce that we normally have to import from other countries in order to get growth cycles because of the entire growing year. And so AppHarvest was this promise to employ tons of Appalachian Kentuckians in these grow houses doing blue collar work for good pay. And then also we wouldn't have to import so much produce from other countries. And well, it fell quite short. It was unable to survive. And the main reason AppHarvest ended up filing bankruptcy was the fact that the people leading the company had no experience. They didn't know how to actually grow things. They may have had the idea, thought of it, and was able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars, not to mention they received tens of millions of dollars in cash from you, the taxpayer, as well as tax breaks and other regulatory breaks from local, state, and federal governments on top of just straight cash from us. But they, outside of people who could do that, they had no experience in the actual topic of growing. And it was a terrible investment from the start for that reason. And I'm not going to defend AppHarvest at all. The article, though, really doesn't focus much on that. In fact, reading this lengthy article from Louisville Public Media, you wouldn't even know that it failed because the people leading it had absolutely no experience at all. Instead, once again, focusing on the emotional and not the logical, the liberals at Louisville Public Media decided to focus instead on the stories of the workers and how the company was just really, really bad and mean to everybody who worked there from the just sheer emotional standpoint. Now, of course, they were really bad and mean to the people who worked there for several reasons, but mainly because they were inexperienced. When they initially hired people, they made a lot of promises to them. Promises because when they were selling the idea to everyone, they said, look, these are going to be great, high-paying jobs. We'll have employer-funded health care, great working environments. It'll be a great place to work because that's what they needed to get the giant investors involved, the liberal governments to give them money, the liberal investors, these high-minded ideas that think, well, we can make money and do good, not that you can't do both. But your first and foremost goal to a company, your first obligation is to make money. You cannot do anything else. You can't employ people. You can't provide great benefits unless, of course, your company that makes money. This is a basic idea, something that, of course, the founders of AppHarvest struggled with the concept of. And so they made a lot of promises, and then they immediately had to roll back on those promises. And then they naturally had issues hiring. They had to bring in contract laborers and immigrants, legal immigration type situations in order to be able to staff everything they needed to. And lo and behold, didn't go great. But that's what Louisville Public Media decided to focus on, is that they didn't fulfill their promises, this liberal agenda promises that they made, and pointing to the failure to fulfill them as a reason why they failed, not pointing to the fact that they were a company with no experience that would make those types of promises in the first place when they couldn't even afford to, was the real reason why they failed. And there's a few lines, though, from the story. Once again, I'm not defending AppHarvest, poorly run company, and I'm mad at our government for giving them tens of millions of dollars of our tax dollars. But there's a few lines that I want to focus on from this article that points to just kind of how they're illogical and how the liberals live in their own world and they just kind of say things. So here's a line from the article. Controlled environment agriculture has to artificially produce optimal growing conditions and power them with electricity. In a world still largely powered by commodified fossil fuels, nearly 70% of Kentucky's grid remains coal-fired, that's going to be prohibitively expensive in most places. Now, if you read that, you would think that coal-fired plants and coal-powered electricity is, of course, very, very expensive. And, well, that's prohibitively expensive. And so, therefore, the growing industry, these greenhouses will have to go somewhere else until we can go off solar and wind. Until then, well, CEA's controlled environment agriculture, well, they can't exist. But frankly, that's a statement made, backed up by no fact, said by an author who apparently didn't do their research. You know, people who listened to the show last week would note that there was a story I talked about regarding 2 of Kentucky's coal-fired power plants being voted to be shut down the day after Election Day in order to avoid it being a reason to attack Beshear from the Cameron campaign, an absolutely political move. And in that story, I presented evidence showing how coal-powered states have the cheapest power in the country outside of course, Idaho, which is all hydroelectric. And of course, you know, hydroelectric has no cost of input after built maintenance. So therefore, of course, it will be cheaper. And furthermore, I pointed to states like California and Rhode Island and others that are getting less than 1, 2, 3% of their power from coal. Instead, the majority of their power is coming from renewables and natural gas, coming from wind and solar and biomass on top of natural gas, and how they have the most expensive utility bills in the country. You see, Louisville Public Media just said, well, it's clearly fossil fuels that is more expensive, without bothering to actually research. In fact, for that one story I did more research into what actually is the trends of expenses. Do coal-powered states have higher utility bills? Is coal power more expensive than renewables or not? I bothered to actually research it. They did no such thing. They say this and just throw it away. Because remember, they say optimal growing conditions empower them with electricity. Well, that's prohibitively more expensive in most places. If they just said that, you could be like, okay, I mean, they're kind of implying that Kentucky was prohibitively expensive, but, Kentucky's, once again, is significantly cheaper, almost 25% cheaper than the average utility cost in the nation. You'd wonder, where is it cheap enough then, other than perhaps Idaho? And you would think, well, okay, well, that's just that. But no, they actually threw in the thing about coal fire. Remember, they said nearly 70% of Kentucky's grid remains coal fire. They mentioned the world's still commodified by fossil fuels as being the reason that it's expensive, when it's the opposite. It's the fact that we are trying to make green energies like solar and wind work when they are prohibitively expensive and fall very short of producing the power we need, or at least our ability to store that power that we need is too expensive for us to do, making utility bills significantly more expensive. That is prohibitively costly. But once again, they don't bring that up. Instead, they paint a completely different picture that make you think that, well, coal was the problem. You see, this isn't a story based upon facts. That much is clear, as much as they pretend to be. This is, once again, a story based upon a liberal agenda with an emotional response, trying to make you believe, well, it was the mean, angry coal in Kentucky that was part of the reason AppHarvest failed, when actually that's one of the only reasons they had a chance to succeed. But there was another couple of paragraphs in this story that points to just how crazy and illogical the left is. We're going to cover that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics and news. 859 Print has local service and low prices. I personally have done tons of business with them, and I can tell you, whether it is getting things printed off, sending direct mail, making business cards, buying TV ad time, digital marketing, they can do it all. And as a special for listeners of this show, they're offering 10% off any and all print services using code RIDER2024. That is code RIDER 2024 for 10% off. Check out 859 Print. You'll be glad you did. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Remember, you can reach out to the show, info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. You can always check out theandrewshow.com as well in order to see all the places where you can listen to us all across this great, wonderful state. Well, before the break, I was talking about this ridiculous liberal article from Louisville Public Media covering AppHarvest and how it was short on facts, long on liberal opinion without realizing it, and how, of course, it really doesn't explain why AppHarvest failed. And once again, I'm not defending AppHarvest. AppHarvest is a terrible company. And so I talked about how they just made assertions that, like, coal plants are too expensive for greenhouses to survive in a state like Kentucky, just blatantly false. But there's another couple paragraphs in the story that really just demonstrate, once again, this illogicalness of the liberals. And here it goes. Let's see. It's buried in the article. And also, too, this kind of points how Bashir got re-elected as well. So in it, they're talking about Anna. I think it's Anna. Her name's Ahna. They made up her name. So they changed a lot of these people's names in order to protect their anonymity, because they had signed non-disclosure agreements. And so her made-up name, this is a made-up name, is Ahna Baxter. Anna Baxter. They couldn't just make it A-N-N-A. They had to throw an H in there. Anna Baxter. It doesn't matter. This person's made up. Well, they're not made up, but their name's made up. So this woman, okay, is who they're talking about. And they say by the time she turned 30, Anna, It's so stupid. If you're going to make up somebody's name, make it like a normal name. Ooh, this is the woke world we live in. They can't just put a normal name on a piece of paper. It's got to be funky and hard to spell or sound out or know exactly how it's supposed to sound. Once again, a made-up name. Anyways, Anna Baxter's life had long been dictated by the demanding hours and low wages of jobs in restaurants and factories. But a temporary gig at a vineyard near her hometown of Frankfort, Kentucky, gave her a glimpse of something different. She learned to press grapes into wine. She grew cucumbers and cantaloupes and admired the sunflowers that waved above her head. For the next few years, she dreamt of starting a small farm of her own. That dream dried up just before the COVID-19 lockdowns. Baxter had just lost both a friend and family member to suicide, and she was becoming dependent on her prescription Adderall on her prescription Adderall to get through the day and alcohol to sleep at night. She abandoned all her fledgling agricultural business, Anna's all natural, and checked into a 30-day rehab program. As Baxter got back on her feet after rehab, she found comfort returning from work every day in time to tune in to Annie Bashir's evening updates. The televised talks were like Mr. Rogers for adults, a familiar voice for Kentuckians dealing with confusion, loneliness, and grief brought on by the pandemic, not to mention everything else Baxter had just been through. So she talks about how the COVID-19 lockdowns and how Baxter was dealing with suicide from a friend and a family member, and she was dealing with addiction and Adderall, and how she had to check into a 30-day rehab program to help her out. And then as she gets back onto her feet, she's listening to Annie Bashir give his evening updates. It is implied through this story that her chances at this were revoked due to the COVID-19 lockdowns. And of course, they don't blame Bashir for the lockdowns because, well, that would just go too far. Instead, they talk about these lockdowns happening, causing this issue of Miss Baxter's life, and ignore that. They ignore the fact that the suicides, the addictions, everything else, the loss of jobs, all has to do with the lockdowns from COVID-19, about how that crushes her dreams, causing her, it appears, to go on the Adderall and addiction and everything else. And then she gets back on her feet and she just finds comfort from Annie Bashir, the same man whose lockdowns destroyed her life. And that is the way that these liberals view things. They ignore the fact that absolutely Bashir was the reason for the lockdowns. He could have chose not to do it, but he destroys her life. And then she finds comfort from the same guy just because he was talking nicely to her, kind of like what is it? Florence Nightingale syndrome. What is it called when? What's that called when they fall in love with the captor? That is called Stockholm syndrome. Thank you, Florence Nightingale syndrome. What is that? I have no clue. Stockholm syndrome. Sorry about that, guys. So it's like a Stockholm syndrome she has for Andy Bashir, destroying her life, but now she feels comfort in his nice, gentle voices. And that kind of just points to why Annie Bashir keeps getting reelected. My overall point in covering the article, while I was hoping it would provide me new insights into AppHarvest I hadn't already discovered, never once did it really mention the tens of millions of dollars taxpayers are giving the business and how that's wrong. Never once does it mention any of this. Instead, it really just dives into and goes into this kind of emotional standpoint. Well, there's a few elections that I want to draw your attention to watch here in the primary. First, for those of you who missed it last week, Senator Schickel, a more conservative senator from Northern Kentucky, pretty good guy, has announced that he is retiring. So, of course, that becomes an open seat in this primary, seeing who ends up trying to run for it. I've heard a few whispers of people. I've heard people like Sal Santora looking at running for it. Sal Santora, of course, lost in a primary, lost his re-election bid for the House in a primary with Marion Proctor, who's now the representative there. I've heard of possibly even Ed Massey trying for it. Once again, lost to a conservative at his reelection bid 2 years ago. Conservative Steve Rawlings, House rep, he lost to in the primary. He's looking at it. I've heard of a few other names. I've heard of Adia Wushner, the state director for Kentucky Right to Life, possibly looking at that seat. I've also heard that she's directly said she wouldn't be running for it. So, we don't want to create any crazy rumors. But I haven't heard of a per se straightforward and obvious liberty pick, conservative pick that would be good for Kentuckians, be good for people on the conservative side of things that is seriously looking at running for it. It will be interesting to see who comes out of the woodwork. Similar situation for Whitney Westerfield's Senate seat. Whitney Westerfield announced he would not be running for office again several years ago. So obviously some people have been working hard to try to grab that seat. But once again, nobody who I'm told comes right out and is obviously a good conservative, good liberty person in those seats looking to run for it. And, why is it that in those seats, you're like, why are you saying there's no good candidates that have come out of the woodwork? What's going on there? I'm actually going to cover that here in a bit. I'm going to cover that after the break because it deals with the question that a viewer had asked me that I want to go into here. But on the subject of races to watch, you also have the Thomas Jefferson versus Killian-Timoney race in the House district. That is South Lexington, Jessamine area. Obviously, Killian-Timoney is the most rated, the most liberal, least conservative Republican state House rep. In fact, there's even been some polls that put Democrats above him as being more conservative. And he's facing off against Thomas T.J. Jefferson right now is how that primary looks. Obviously, Thomas Jefferson is a much stronger conservative. I do know him personally. He's been on the show before and interviewed with me before. He's a good guy. Killian-Timoney, on the other hand, while he may be a nice man, and I generally like the guy as a person, he's very nice. That doesn't mean I want him in power making rules. He works for the Fayette County Public Schools, and his votes on education are just very liberal. Definitely show he's been compromised by working for Fayette County Public Schools, while at the same time his views on a few other things really don't align with where you would want most conservatives to be. Also, you got Kim Mosier out of Northern Kentucky. She famously called the rest of the House Neanderthals for wanting to outlaw gender affirmative care, hormones and surgeries and all those things. Will she get an opponent? I don't know. We will see. Well, coming up after this, though, I'm going to go over that user comment and talk about what's wrong with Kentucky legislature. We'll have all that after this short break. Listen up, my fellow business owners. You need to get your cybersecurity and IT support under control. Reach out to the folks at Amston today. Call 859-300-0087 or visit amston.com. It is no secret that cyber attacks have become a constant threat, and you need to make sure that your organization is protected. Amston has over 30 years of experience working with businesses and governments alike. Call 859-300-0087 or visit AmstonAMPSTUN.com today. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. You can always reach out to the show, info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, info@theandrewshow.com. By reaching out there, sending us an email, making comments on the show, you could hear me respond to you here on air. In fact, a person commented on our YouTube episode last week, I believe the episode from Friday, and commented, this is from a Marty 1776-2, that's the screen name on YouTube, asked the question, most of the politicians here absolutely suck. What's the deal? Are they bought? Are they stealing elections? What the H is going on in Frankfurt? And so, Marty 1776-2 asked this question, and I think it's a question on a lot of people's mind. How are we such a conservative state, but yet we still spend more money? We have some of the most corrupt politicians. We have a Republican supermajority that refuses to cut taxes because they've overspent even what they planned on. So they say we just can't afford it because they can't stop themselves from spending more and more money, even more than they say they should. How have we ended up here? How do we end up in a position where we have to fight, beg, and plead to even get half measure conservative things done? Meanwhile, largely unimportant to the masses slash things that absolutely go against our best interests pass seemingly with flying colors easy. It almost like it doesn't even get a conservative thought. And, to largely answer that, I need you to only look in a mirror. And that's what I'm saying. Look in a mirror. We need but only blame ourselves. And it's time for some real checkup there. We get bad politicians because it's who we vote for. Now, it's not necessarily your fault. Those of you listening to this, maybe you are a person who pays great attention when you vote. But the fact of the matter is the average voter is very, very busy. They're too busy to stay informed on exactly everything that's going on. Or maybe they stay informed on the national politics, but they don't stay informed on what's going on in state politics. I'll give you a perfect example. This was several years ago, for a state Supreme Court, Kentucky State Supreme Court. There's a poll done on what is the biggest issue you're concerned about when it comes to the state Supreme Court. This was done for a campaign. And the state Supreme Court deals with a lot of very important things. Things like how do you, interpret the Constitution on abortion? How do you interpret the state constitution on school choice? How do you interpret the ability for the governor to have the rights to shut down our state and lay off 1 million people? Do you believe that is within the constitutional purview of the governor or not? What limitations do you believe? What do you believe is the state role, the role of state government in people's lives? What parts of the Constitution best inform you? All these are important questions to ask for a state, once again, state Supreme Court. But you know what the most important issue polled was immigration. And while immigration is very important, and while there are a few things the state Supreme Court may do when it comes to illegal immigration, that should not be for that role your chief concern, because there is not much they do dealing with illegal immigration. That would fall the state Supreme Court. Your feelings about that should be pretty strong, because obviously it's been some erroneous court rulings that have caused us to have such a big problem on the southern border with illegal immigrants. But at the state level, for state Supreme Court, that shouldn't be your biggest concern, but yet it was. Why is that? Because a lot of people watch a whole lot of national politics, and of course, illegal immigration, especially in our modern times, has been a gigantic issue on the national level, a big problem that is working to destroy our country and will have great ramifications. But they don't pay attention to state level politics, whether it's because, they only get a brief glimpses of what's going on in the state from the nightly news. Otherwise, they don't hear much about it. They're not listening to radio programs like this. Even other local talk people that do sometimes touch on politics, it's very surface level, and they bring on some of the least insightful, very liberal people. They just do. They bring on the same corrupt politicians that want you to not pay deep attention. And so because we've farmed out the way we do everything else, our ability to stay informed on politics to our media overlords, whoever that may be, whether it's Fox or MSNBC or even Newsmax or what have you, they're not touching on state level politics. So in order for a corrupt, horrible state level legislator to win re-election, they need only message you on things they can't even deal with, and they just need to get that message to you. Most voters will not go seek out to stay informed with who's on their ballot. If you go and look at the websites for all the people who just won re-election or just won election at the state level here, the constitutional level, what you will find is almost none of them have direct and exact policy information, because it isn't needed. Voters don't want it. They don't ask for it. They don't stay informed on it. All they want to hear is platitudes, and that's it. They want to hear you talk about national political issues, even if it has nothing to do with you. It gives you the ability to demagogue those issues with enough money into getting people to vote for you. And so why do we get bad politicians? Because it's bad politicians that bring in the most amount of money. If you are not staying informed on it, instead you're relying on other people to inform you, well, those people able to reach you with a message, whether it's through advertisements, mailers, texts to your phone, ads online, ads during YouTube videos, you name it, wherever you get political ads, robocalls, the people who have the money to get that message to you will be the people you vote for. The average primary voter isn't bothering to look at their ballot and then go even do a basic Google of who's running. And when they see an incumbent running, they don't bother to go look at their voting record. They don't pick out maybe 5 important bills and say, well, I'm definitely not voting for them. I know this to be true because if you picked out, let's say, 5 important bills, let's say 5 important bills from last session. So let's say you're looking at, or last couple of years, right? So let's say you're maybe looking at a school choice vote. You're looking at the Senate Bill 150 vote as far as outlawing, gender transition, as well as obviously the school issues with, boys and girls bathrooms. That was dealt with in Senate Bill 150. There was, bills on mandating vaccine mandates in 2021. If you go back and you look at those bills, mask mandates, there was a vote on that in 2021. If you go back and look at those bills, pick out maybe 5 of those bills, look at how your representative voted on them. If you did that, well then, if every citizen did that, well then we would have a lot better legislators. And I know most don't, because going back to the race I talked about earlier, Killian-Timoney versus Thomas Jefferson, Killian-Timoney wouldn't stand a chance. Any single bill that would matter to your average conservative, Timoney voted the wrong way on. And it just takes a bit of research to find that out. That's why he is the most liberal Republican in our state legislature. This is simple, little bit of a Google search, a little bit of a research on that, looking at LRC's website, but they're not going to do that. They're going to farm that out to whoever can get the message to them. In order to get the message to you, it costs money. For an example, in your average state house primary, you're going to have probably around about, let's say on the high side, 3,500 voters. This year, you may end up with as much as 4,000 primary voters because Trump is on the ballot in the primary. So at 4,000 primary voters, an average of 1.5 votes per household, husband and wife, that's going to be right around 2,700 households. The average mailer right now costs at least 60 cents to send. You're looking at right around about $1,500 a mailer. $1,500 a mailer just to send it to a guess of who you think is going to show up to vote. $1,600. Your average ad, it's costs $50, $60 an ad. Every time you see an ad on your local TV on every station, and Lexington has 4 stations, in order to run one ad on each station, it's going to cost you $200. You want to run several ads an hour? Well, that's going to cost you $400, $500, $600. You got radio stations, maybe you want to run ads on, that's going to cost you some money. And the list goes on and on and on of all the expenses that go into a campaign, meaning that if a state house rep is bad and wants to be taken on by somebody, well, that person's going to need to spend at least $50,000 to $60,000 most of the time. Now, if it's a low information year, you got a lot of door knockers out there, you could make a difference spending less, but you still need at least $30,000. $25,000, $30,000, getting that kind of money together, who has that to blow? And then trying to bring that in from donors. Well, the people who donate into politics right now, they're not people looking out for your best interests. They're people that aren't making donations, but they're making investments, and they want to pay off for that investment. And that's why we end up with some of the worst people in office, because we broke our politics. We don't pay enough attention. And so instead, our votes can be bought because we are not informed. And so whoever can deliver us the most amount of messages wins. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. Have a great rest of your day.